Chapter 20. Knowing and Intuition. You can think you understand a matter, but you must first come to know you don't understand a thing. Without going too deep into this, just see this. The word used here for know is implying intuition. Other words, not via the natural senses. It's a knowing that precedes understanding. Many times it requires a simple acting upon this knowing, then the understanding comes. Or there are times if we ask for the understanding, it is revealed to us. This knowing comes without prompting. It is not a rational matter. It becomes a rational matter only once it is revealed to our understanding experience. We could just act on the knowing, but because of the weakness of our flesh, we usually want to understand before acting. It's been said in this way, faith without works is dead. James chapter 2, verse 20. This text is better said this way. Hearing intuition, if acted upon, and if not acted upon and questioned, runs the risk of dying. Show your faith intuition by your acting upon it without question, and its understanding will be seen in this action. You can see why James' writings can be misunderstood and thought to mean he was saying self-righteous works. He wasn't saying this. He was saying, if you hear from God to do something, unprompted of your self-efforts to do good works, this is faith, intuition. Follow this, and what is said will come about. Don't let it die. Chapter 21. Honesty of experience. Being honest as to how we gain any insight requires running the risk of casting pearls of experience for dogs and swine, as I mentioned in chapter 15. Ask yourself, how did Jesus learn this truth about dogs and swine? He learned it via doing just that, something we all have learned. It clearly said, though he were a son, yet he learned obedience by the things he suffered. It is not a sin to learn this way, what we call making mistakes. Remember, Jesus was the Son of God in the mode of the Son of Man. He was touched with all our infirmities. Thus, as a Son of Man, learned as we learn, yet without sinning in this. He'd see his mistakes, as we do, corrected by learning to hear God the Father's take on matter, then do what he saw and heard from the Father. Something I am teaching and sharing here, with our learning in the same manner, to hear Christ's voice in us, making the corrections and going on with that correction. What I share here is not a contradiction of what I shared earlier in chapter 15. I will run this risk from time to time of sharing some pearls, as led to do so in future chapters of this book. What's the difference of learning the first time by our mistakes? The Son of Man, even in the learning mode, wasn't acting independent from God the Father, sinning, because this was exactly how the Father had wanted it. This must be understood, or you will have those who might say that I'm saying that the Son of Man, Jesus, sinned. We have clearly stated Jesus' own words, accuse me of sin, acting independent from the Father's will. So as I just said, in this mode of being as one of us, he learned obedience by the things he suffered. This qualified him as a true man. Yet not being born from Adam's seed, Joseph in this case, and being virgin born, qualified him as a pure sacrifice capable of dying for the sin nature of Adam and humanity. I ask you, the reader of this book, how do you, the reader of this book, gain these same insights I share in this book? The only way is to experience what the Son of Man and I, too, go through to gain them. See this in light of this text. You reign with him, you will suffer with him. In other words, his example reveals how it all works. In Romans 5, Paul says that the only way to gain this experience I have just mentioned is through tribulation. If you do not want to go through tribulations in life and fight life, attempting to avoid them, you will not gain needed insight to where you learn to hear God speak to you. I and others have learned that in our deepest moments of communicating to this God, or after heart-wrenching moments of depression, feelings of darkness and despair, feeling there was no way out and that God had deserted us. Only then did light shine out of the darkness. When you discover this fact, you will do the impossible. Rejoice in tribulations. Something Paul says in the same chapter of Romans chapter 5. He wasn't sharing theory. He was writing from experience. When we learn this, we discover this, we gain our patience, allowing the tribulation to work that which it desires to work. What is that? The needed experience to rejoice for those that rejoice and to weep for those that weep. I can't think of any other way for this to happen. Can you? When I hear that the many stories others have shared to me, there are moments of weakness, hopelessness, despair. I truly can understand them say as such. It's not just theory, though I do share some of the theory in this book. I speak from experience, my pearls. Those sometimes different from those I hear from, but pain is pain, sorrow is sorrow, and feelings of helplessness and worthlessness resonate no matter the circumstances that produce these reactions of life's experience. I went through Vietnam. Can you, who never went through this experience, ever hope to understand me? Well, if you ever felt lonely, if you ever felt rejected, if you ever felt fear and a gauntlet of other emotions and thoughts, then you already understand me. Truly, there is no temptation, test, or trial that isn't common to all. And all of us can come to experience this common bond and learn from one another's experience of how God was able to bring you up out of those moments and set your feet on a rock. We are not alone. To think you're the only one going through any particular experience unique to only you is idolatry, a self-worship of pity. Don't blame me for saying this. Read it and all that I have just said in 1 Corinthians 10, 13 through 14, which I have added to the end of this chapter. We, in the flesh, have learned to classify pity. We form special groups that appear to help, and they do in some degree, yet it ends up in dividing those from those who they feel can't possibly understand their unique problems. Our problem is the problem of failing to see that we are all in this together. A problem that reaches clean back to the original problem that brought about all the problems we encounter in the world, cut off from a God who has addressed the real problem, the fall of Adam and Eve. Yet we seek, by our efforts, to solve isolated problems. We seek to hold down the truth and root of all our problems. Not until humanity can face this one truth will they come to know when it is a time to embrace and a time to not embrace. When one is on a self-pity trip, thinking he or she is the only one going through a trial, that is not the time to embrace. Yet there are moments when you do embrace, sharing your pearls of experience with them by the leading of the Holy Spirit who gave you this experience to share. Letting them know that you're not alone in this experience. You have something in common. They also came from our fallen parents, Adam and Eve. Here's the text I mentioned for those who may want to read it, found in the King James expression of it in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 13 to 14. There is no temptation, test or trial taken you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to endure it or bear it. Wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee idolatry. I speak to wise men, judge what I say. So I say to those of you who might not see what I've said and seen in this text and expressed in this chapter, judge what I have said. The above paragraphs before this text of the letter of the Bible are living words of this dead text. You judge if what I have said goes beyond what is written. Here's the paraphrase of this King James text, which I give. There's no temptation, test, or trial that's unique to you and you alone. But God knows your condition, that all born on this planet were cut off from Him, suffering the greatest injustice ever suffered by any man or woman, simply because of the act of their original parents, Adam and Eve. An injustice that outweighs any injustice you may feel, only you suffer. God, knowing this and being a just God, made a way to escape this injustice created of the devil himself. A one-for-one exchange made up this escape. His Son, as the second Adam, took this injustice unto himself, suffered unjustly for things he never did, so we can't ever think we're not understood or loved. I hope I am speaking to men and women who can see the wisdom in all this. God saw the problem, addressed it, and solved it before the foundations of this world. Before you were ever born, before the devil ever made his move, God moved with compassion and love for those created in His image and found a way, the only way of justice. To reject this is to worship your own self-pity, the lie that your problem is any different from anyone else's. Flee this idolatry which demands special treatments and blinds you from the real problem. You may be thinking, what has this to do with learning to hear God's voice? Evil loves to distract us from hearing from God. It gets us to focus on self. Think, if you were to view a group photograph, who do you look for first? It is our nature to look for ourselves. It is our makeup from Adam to think of ourselves. So, as the title of this chapter is, Honesty of Experience. Be willing to admit that the majority of our time is spent thinking of this self. What is it? What's in it for me? Motive and intents come into play. If you want to hear from God, the self will feel threatened. Thus you can see why many can't read the written word of God, let alone the living word, which I am addressing in this book. Until this self is identified and submitted, self-thoughts tend to mimic hearing from God, when in truth it is yourself. Hear what James says in James chapter 4, verses 7 to 10. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. In other words, speak to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be afflicted, mourn, and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourself in the sight of God, and He will lift you up. If and when your self reads this text in the correct manner, it will be offended. Read what James is saying. Submit yourself, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Who is the devil? It's plain from what James saw. Self. And that self is you. As the expression goes, we are our own worst enemy. This matter of drawing near to God and learning to hear from Him requires submitting every self-elevated thought unto Christ, as I've mentioned in the previous chapter. Most don't want to come under such scrutiny and would resist submitting their self-thoughts. It starts with a conscious level. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Those who have had all their lives follow self-thoughts alone, cut off from God. The second level is purify your hearts. Subconscious level, which James calls the double mind. It is this double mind that reveals hidden, secret motives of this heart that appears to be good when it's in action, yet motives make it what it really is, evil in nature. Jesus, when addressing the Pharisees, brings this truth out in John 8, starting with verse 43. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my words. You are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do. He, the devil, was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is not truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And because I tell you the truth, you believe me not. Which of you convinces me of sin? And if I say the truth, why do you not believe me? He that is of God hears God's words. You therefore hear them not, because you're not of God. What's the biggest lie coming from this liar? With the unaided mind, without God speaking to you, you can figure out this existence in your life. Don't let the devil's scarecrow, the lie, keep you out of God's cornfield. Don't allow it to have you miss one of the most beautiful moments you could ever hear, his voice.